Okay. Since we only have 45 minutes, let's go for it. And I'm happy a few people are here interested in the third part of the Bits and Bytes session about telling your research story. And I will give you a bit of an input, and then again, please feel free to ask questions. You can ask questions also anytime. We're like a small group; we don't have much time, so please feel free to either raise your hand or write in the chat if you like. I'm gonna share my screen for you. And I would like to start with maybe a familiar experience that you have. Maybe you're at a conference and you hear a talk, or someone is presenting their work, and it feels a little bit like that. That is Michael Scott from The Office. Maybe some of you know him. Sometimes I start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way. And that's a bit of a problem, especially if you're the audience. And this is something that we would like um, to not do when talking about research. On the other hand, they're very compelling stories in general in research and science. All of you might probably or very likely know who these three people are. You're all familiar with who that is? So that is Uygur Şahin, Katalin Kariko, and Özlem Türeci. Those are the developers of the mRNA vaccine during COVID, right? And there's this big story about how they basically figured it out and everything that came afterwards. So there are characters, there's a problem, there's a solution, there's an outcome. So it's a very classic story. But today, I want to give you some insights in how you can tell your research story. And maybe some of you think about that like that. I have no idea exactly how to do it. I mean, you all know what your research is about, I'm pretty sure, but I'm not sure how often you have told it as a story. Often you hear that, what's the story of your paper? What's the story of your research? But what does that actually mean? Before we start, a quick introduction. Who am I to tell you all of this? My name is Anna. I'm the director of GSO, Guidance, Skills, and Opportunities for Researchers. We're a nonprofit here in Berlin, and we support researchers like you with everything career related in academia or beyond. And if you're interested, you can just connect with me on LinkedIn or also check out our website. We have also a lot of free resources there that might be helpful for you. Let's start a little bit with a background. What actually is a story? So a bit of theory is always really helpful as sort of a backdrop for everything that will come afterwards. So I really like this explanation here. In the context of, in the context of research, a story is a structured narrative. I think that is very important. It's a narrative with a structure. It's not just like data compiled together, right? It rather connects those data findings and insights into a central theme or purpose, engaging the audience. Incredibly important. Always think about who is actually my audience when I tell a story, right? Is it an expert audience? Is it, some people interested in my research? Is my grandma? Is it high schoolers, right? And that's important. You want to engage the audience with a goal. You want to foster understanding, emotional connection, and recall. And this is important. Telling a story is not an end in itself. You want to do something with it or, accomplish something with it. Remember, data doesn't speak for itself. And a story, in this sense, transforms raw information into a journey with a purpose, showing not just what the researcher found, but, and that is super important, why it matters. Why should we even care about your research? Why should we even care about what you say? And those are, I think, some important parts to keep in mind. To wrap this up or to bring it in one very short sentence, I like this quote here by Brene Brown, also kind of like a famous author, who said stories are data with a soul. And I think if you keep that as an idea, that might be very helpful. Now, there are a few different ways to build a story in research or also talk about your research, especially when it comes to different audiences. And a very simple, very first way that has like three different basically parts is that you are able to communicate what the vision for your research is, what your contribution is, and what the objectives are. To make it even a little bit easier, you could also say, why am I doing what I'm doing? How am I doing it? And what am I doing concretely? This is related to Simon Sinek's golden circle, how to like communicate also ideas or, pitch ideas in general. So if you just remember why, how, and what, that is already a good start. However, these are just like three different elements. So in a story, ideally, you try to connect these different elements in a compelling way. Remember, it's a structured narrative. It doesn't always have to be like that. Like when we talk about storytelling in research, don't overcomplicate it. Sometimes you can apply all these theoretical backgrounds, sometimes not. It's more about that you have a sense of how can you build different elements in a way that an audience gains understanding and interest, right? However, in order to sort of build this structured narrative, you might be familiar, at least I'm familiar from like German class back in high school, with Freytag's pyramid. Gustav Freytag was a writer, a German writer, and in the 19th century, he basically broke down what makes a good story. And even today, screenwriters, novelists use that as a blueprint for creating stories, right? You see exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution, or to make it a little bit easier, you can also break it down in what is the setting, what are the characters, what's the journey or the conflict, what is the discovery in the end, or then what is a resolution? How did we sort of deal with the whole situation, and maybe even a call for action, like a moral or what's the next step. Again, you don't always have to use all these elements. It's not always the right choice for every audience. We will go through that in a little bit, but it's good that you keep that in mind, that you have this very actual simple arc that you can use when you, for instance, write a paper, right? And not just like say, first we did this, then we did that, and then this happened, but make it more intriguing in the sense that there is a bit of tension, that you tried this didn't work, but then something came along and you discovered something. So that is a very simple way to approach storytelling also in research. Now, you might also remember from the definition of what a story is that there should be a goal involved and the audience, your target group. So always remember what's the goal, what's the target group. And here in this model by NAVIC is the National Institute for Science Communication. They also added elements to a story that is medium. So what is basically the container that I transport the story in, like for instance, social media, which channel, or is it a paper, or is it a conference talk, and so on. The style that, also will be a consequence of the goal and the target group and the medium. And of course, the basis is your topic. Yeah. So those are also really important elements. And therefore, we could say, if we want to remember one thing, the why, the how, and the what, and the way to connect it, we should also always remember for whom are we doing that and in what way are we doing that. Now, you could say, oh, that's very interesting, but why can I not just like, you know, communicate my research. So why is storytelling actually important? So it's important for three parts: practice of research, career booster, and responsibility in research. Often these things are a little bit intertwined. You cannot, like, segregate them all the time. So they're interconnected, and I will give you short examples, brief examples for each of these three um, yeah, application areas. Now, practice of research, that would be, for instance, writing papers or proposals, grant proposals for gaining money, or for instance, getting a collaboration started, right? Gain collaborators, make someone interested in your research. There's a really interesting book, and therefore it's quite helpful to also see that storytelling is not just a nice to have, but it's actually really important for the practice of research. Timothy Pollack wrote this book, How to Use Storytelling in Your Academic Writing, and he even says that there were findings, and they could actually prove that clearly written articles are cited more frequently and are more likely to become high impact home runs. And on the contrary, bad writing inhibits otherwise promising ideas from reaching the public because the paper fail to make it through the review process, and even published articles can have limited influence if their core ideas are inaccessible and they make readers think about taking a nap 5 minutes after they begin reading. And you might be very familiar with this because you read a lot of papers, you've seen a lot of talks, and you can really distinguish. And what is a talk? Remember that I understood and that I can do something about, rather than, I think about other stuff. It's also really important for the practice of research, specifically when writing grant proposals. This is an interesting article from Science Careers. It applies to the US American market, and it's specifically for neuroscience, but I think that doesn't matter all that much, because they were asking selection committees what makes a candidate actually stand out, right? Someone who you want to hire for a faculty position. And they say, hey, we really look at the research statement, which is similar also later on to a grant proposal. What is the vision for what they want to do? How would they fit in the department? So you often hear that term vision of your research. Remember one of these three parts, vision, really important also for selection committees or for reviewers of your proposal. And I want to underline that and give some advice here. This is Renate. She was quite successful in acquiring research funding, one of our research grants, but also other research funding. And she says also, for a grant proposal, find a research topic or project that represents you and your research vision and that you are convinced of. Only then you can be authentic and tell a good story because you're into it, you're interested in it, right? Use each application, grant proposal application, to represent you as a person, what drives you in your research, what is your vision, and how do you want to implement this. So you can also be a character in that story, in your research story, right? And get feedback, of course, from mentors and peers, because they can tell you whether the reviewers will get your ideas. Also remember, if you tell someone your story, will they remember and can they reiterate your story? That would also be a goal. Like, that would be really helpful. Try that with someone else and ask them, what have I just told you? And if they can repeat that, then it's a good, memorable sort of storyline. Now, here is a little bit of an example of, a very sort of simple way to use this vision contribution objectives cake, or the why, how, and what. For instance, the audience would be a reviewer of a grant proposal, right? This is sort of like a made up scientific approach here. But what I wanted to show you, this is the first very simple step, that when you have to write a grant proposal or a research statement for an interview, that you first become clear about what is my vision, what's my contribution, and what are the objectives. And remember, vision is always, why does it matter in the big picture? Why is it important for the research field? It's not what you have to do, but why is what you're doing cool and important? And then you talk about, what is my specific contribution, my project, the one step towards that vision that I go. And how and what do I do exactly? What are my objectives? I go through those different parts. That would be the simple part. And in a grant proposal, of course, you have more space. You don't just have to write like these three short blurbs. You can then sort of lay it out. Vision, contribution, objectives connected with what is important, what did you find, what is maybe the problem or the struggle, and how are you going to find a resolution, and what would be the next step, what would be the resolution. So that would be that nice arc that you can then get deeper into when you write a whole research proposal. Number two, how can storytelling be also a career booster for you? And Oya, she's also a researcher. She says, well, it's really important that you are proactive and say what you want. Like, let's say you want to become a group leader, or you want to become a professor, or you want to go to that conference. It's really important that you say that directly and communicate that, and you have to reach out to people, right? And think about like conferences, or a potential lab you want to work at, or a potential institute you want to work at, or you want to find like collaborators for this big project. So you need to also be able to convince people that your research is interesting and cool, and to make connections. And that can be different ways. So let's say you meet an expert at a conference, right? Sometimes happens, someone cool, you want to approach them. Remember, here, when it comes to storytelling, start with something that is familiar for them. Make it about them, not about you. Make the gap explicit, like, what is the problem, so to say? What is the problem that we want to solve in that story? Be precise. Don't oversell it. Like, don't make a whole fairy tale with fairies and lots of fluff around it. Stick to the facts. Be precise, and end with a bridge, not necessarily a conclusion. So you can say, what do you think about it? So, for instance, I give you a little example. Make it about them. You can say, hey, I read your recent paper on whatever. I especially liked your point about whatever. In my work, now you go to your story, I see a related change, a related challenge. So I'm using this approach and look at it from this angle. That would be a possible resolution, right? And what we find is this and that. And I'd be curious how that connects to your work. That would be a call for action in that sense, right? So you see how you have to shift these stories a little bit depending on the situation, the context, and your audience. But this would be a way how you can basically easily sell, so to say, your story to an expert at a conference. And again, it can also be a career booster, because in interviews, you will have to give talks, or you're asked to very briefly explain what you're doing in your research. Usually that can be, for instance, a 5-minute pitch or something like that. Or in some cases, you might even have experienced that people give you a chalk and a blackboard, and then they say, can you please explain your research just using a chalk and a blackboard? Yeah. And if you're able to do that in a compelling way and people are still listening to you, then you have, again, a good story. And to just sort of practice that and to figure that out for yourself, again, vision, contribution, objectives in a good storyline, that is something that you can train. So for instance, like let's say your audience is a selection committee, right? You give an interview, you want to have a job, audience is a selection committee. You again start with a setting. Yeah, the setting is what do we know? What is the status quo? What is the problem? Yeah, we always have to introduce like some kind of tension or problem. Yeah, this limits our ability. There is like some sort of problem. Then what do you do? I address this by doing this and that. I sort of offer something, drawing on my experience. You have to also make it about you because they want to know why can you solve this problem? Why are you the main character, the hero, so to say, in the story that helps to resolve it? And also tell them how you're gonna change or solve the problem going forward. I aim to do this and that. And you can even have a call for action or something like that. I see a strong fit with your research environment. I would like to work with person A, B, or C. Yeah. Again, make it about them, problem, resolution, call for action. You can also maybe say, oh, maybe I don't even want to address a scientific audience. Maybe I want to address companies or, other audiences. This, for instance, is Maria Elena. She works with rocks, materials, and she quite frequently now gives keynotes and talks for companies, and she gains quite a bit of an income through that as well. But of course, talking in front of company representatives, you cannot do it the same way as giving an academic talk, right? So it has to be a different. So for instance, you have to completely shift what you're doing. You would not talk about, okay, what is maybe going on in the interstellar world, because that was the example that I gave you. It's always the same one. You can say, oh, what would be really interesting for the audience? We work on detecting very weak signals in extremely noisy environments. And this is something that I do in my research and that might be interesting for you. That might be a solution for you. And this could be a next step. This could be a call for action, right? Again, who's your audience? How do I have to change the story? How can I make it about them? And what could maybe be a different kind of story than what you usually tell in your academic setting? Maybe this time it's about weak signals rather than organic material in space, right? Last but not least, all of you are really high performing and very smart people, and it would be really a shame if you wouldn't be able to also represent science or scientific discoveries with a wider public or a wider audience. So there's a bit of responsibility that all of you as researchers also have. And again, this is Lorenz. He does a lot of science communication, science slams, he even does like science rap music. So again, remember the medium can be very, very different. It doesn't have to be like this classic talk or whatever, right? It can also be, again, a science slam. There is, I think, a competition, dance your PhD. Yeah. So there are different ways of expressing yourself. And remember, being visible is always a good idea. It can also be a career booster. It's not only your responsibility in society, it can also be a career booster. And it can be fun. We often forget that. We always think about, oh, it has to be good for my career and I have to do this and that. But maybe it's also fun to do these things. And storytelling and research and telling a cool story about your research can also be fun. I think this is the example where Freitag's pyramid comes out the most if you really try to tell a story for an audience that is relatively far away from other experts. So let's say you have to talk to visitors at long night of science. You all know that, right? So you have like the general public, like looking at research institutions, and then their little talks or yeah, little showcasings, and then you have to explain what you're doing to, I don't know, people who have otherwise nothing to do with your research or with research in general. So here a storytelling, and the setting can be that you irritate or you make it interesting in a way. You can work with tension or something relatable. You can define again a main character. What are you following? System, a question, or a problem. Always show your thinking, not just the methods. I think that is generally a good advice for storytelling. Say, even when you write a paper, you could do that. We first thought this would be a good way, but then we came to the conclusion doing this and that it would be better to go down this path, right? We were uncertain about this and that, and this is why we tried this and that. Yeah. Be very simple. Also, sometimes for job interviews or something like that, stick to your main vision, your main contribution, your main methods. Because remember, people have to remember what you're saying. And the more precise you are, the higher is the chance that people will remember it. Yeah. Use a strong anchor. I also, yeah, use that in the beginning. Connect with something familiar. Use metaphors, something like that people can relate to. And again, separate results from relevance, especially with non-academic audiences. Not what was the outcome, what did you find, but why did it matter? And I think this is really important for yourself. Why does it matter? And end with what's next. Maybe have a funny ending. Tell them why is that important? What could be an application for that, or something like that. And remember, I showed you an example from astrophysics and from finding like organic material in like space. You could even go on to ask other questions. For instance, Lorenz here, he started out with the good questions. Will robots take care of our ill people in the future? Or you connect it to something familiar, for instance, the catastrophe, the flooding in the Ahrtal in 2021. Or you ask good questions that we all can relate to. For instance, Nausicaa, who is an art historian, why are we so afraid to say something stupid when we talk about art? Yeah, so try to relate to people and do something interesting. And circling back to my previous example, space, organic material in space, you could start with something like, hey, does the Milky Way smell like raspberries? This is kind of like an interesting question, and people will sort of stop. They will be irritated a little bit. And then you can build on that and then explain, why are you saying that? For instance, because there's like an organic molecule that is also present in raspberries. And then the question is, okay, does the space also smell like raspberries if that's in there, right? And you can make like a compelling ending. Next time you eat raspberries, remember there's a little bit of space in them too, right? So depending again on your audience, have a nice arc, have a nice compelling story that is interesting to them. And that's it for now, for this little bite-sized talk. And I hope that you can soon say, let me tell you a story about your research. And I'm very happy to discuss with you maybe what you have encountered, what worked for you. And maybe after the talk, you can write a brief draft for one of these audiences about your research. Maybe something that is coming up. You have to write a paper soon, or you have to write a grant application or something like that, or you meet a company representative. I don't know. But that would be something that you could try out. And yeah, now I'm curious also to hear about your experiences and your questions. Thank you.